At noon today, I presented a program to the Iron Mountain Kingsford Rotary Club, and it was a ghost story, the story of Willie and the Chippewa Club. It's now about 2:30 in the afternoon of March the 6th, and I'm recreating this for our files. It's hard to know where to start in this story. Perhaps a little bit of history about the Chippewa Club would be in order at this point. In 1945, Albie Flodine, Martin Thomas, and Abbott Fox purchased the Chippewa Club from Mrs. Charlotte Davidson, and they paid $18,000 for the building. They had in mind forming a club that would be much like the Longfellow House down in Pascagoula, Mississippi, owned by the Ingalls Shipbuilding Company. Mr. Flodine, during the Second World War, had had time to visit the Longfellow House and enjoyed its comfort and its easy style and manner, and hoped to create a club in the Chippewa Club that would be similar to that. He wanted to serve meals, serve refreshments, and have rooms for people to stay in when they came to visit his company and others in the area. Shortly after the club opened, strange things started to happen. Now, there are three types of people in the world when it comes to ghosts. There are those who absolutely do not believe. There are those who absolutely believe. And then there are those somewhere in between who are really not sure whether there's ghosts or not. I started coming to the Chippewa Club in 1946 with my parents when my parents returned from the Second World War and the Washington, D.C. area. I have moved from being an absolute not believer to one that wonders whether there might be something here. Too many things have gone on, and too many people have reported them independently for me not to think there might be something here. Back when the club was started, the bar was located in what is now the ladies' restroom. The kitchen was in the second half of this dining room, and the mirror and the cupboards under the mirror actually sat up in where the room divider is now in a butler's pantry. But back to the story. The guests that would stay here woke up at night and heard children crying, or a child crying, or somebody walking on the third floor, or somebody running down the stairs, and when they checked, nobody was there. The staff would see tablecloths out from the drawers that they were stored in the butler's pantry. Liquor bottles were moved, and some were knocked over in the bar, and they would hear people walking down the stairs, and when they would check on it, nobody was there. It got so bad that the staff members, some of the staff members, were afraid to come into the club alone. And some of the overnight guests started staying in the Dickinson Hotel instead of staying at the Chippewa Club. This came to the attention of the club's officers in early 1947. And Charlie Madden, who was the longtime secretary for Lakeshore and also the club secretary, happened to see Mrs. Davidson, Mrs. Charlotte Davidson, downtown one day and asked if she knew anything about this. And her answer was, "Oh, it must be Willie." Well, they took quite a while that afternoon talking about it and talking about the story of Willie. And it goes something like this. In 1898, the Chippewa Club was built as the home for the manager of the Oliver Iron Mining Company, the U.S. Steel Company's mining operation. The first manager was a fellow by the name of Thomas Cole, but he did not live in this house. The first manager to live in the house was James McNaughton from 1898 to 1901, when he moved on to the copper country to take on work with Calumet and Hecla. Otto C. Davidson and his wife Charlotte moved into the house in 1901 and stayed there until 1932 when the Chapin mine closed, and then moved to a house on 4th Street on the north side. O.C. Davidson passed away in 1944 and his wife passed away in 1955. Charlotte Davidson was the daughter of William and Elizabeth Dickinson, and she moved to Florence, Wisconsin in the summer of 1881 at the age of 12. And she had 2 siblings that moved with her and her parents, Christine, 7, and Willie, at age 6. Mr. Dickinson had come to Florence to become the superintendent of the Commonwealth mine. And shortly after he arrived, Mr. Dickinson let it be known that he wanted all of the cribs or whorehouses or houses of ill repute shut down in Florence. This met with a great deal of resistance from the bar owners in Florence. And the message came back to Mr. Dickinson: if you do that, something terrible is going to happen to your family. Well, he didn't listen to the threats. He closed down the houses and he shipped the bad people, men and women, out on the next train. On the evening of November 1st, 1881, about 5 or 6 months after he arrived in town, Charlotte Dickinson and her brother Willie Dickinson were walking home from school. And Charlotte got ahead of her brother, and as she was moving along, she turned and saw her brother talking to 2 men. She didn't think anything of it at the time and went home. They waited for her brother Willie, and he did not come home. And he did not come home the next morning, nor the next night. He never came home. He disappeared. Mrs. Dickinson was distraught. Mr. Dickinson was furious. And they put up a large reward. Many search parties went out and searched in the woods and around the area, but nothing was found. Nothing was found. The Dickinsons, for the rest of their life, particularly Mrs. Dickinson, went to many places in the world: Tokyo, San Francisco, Sao Paulo, Brazil, London, you name it, and there were rumors and hints and tips that Willie might be there. But actually, nothing was ever found. The Dickinsons left Florence in 1889 and went to Bessemer, and then they went to Cuba, but then returned to Florence in 1894. Now, the time that they were gone, the situation or the deal about Willie kind of dissipated, and there wasn't a lot of conversation. But when they came back, people started talking about it somewhat. But Mr. Dickinson died in 1899, and Mrs. Dickinson died in 1925, never finding Willie or really having any good evidence that he was still alive. But now, here is the good part. Otto C. Davidson and Charlotte Dickinson Davidson, for Mrs. Davidson was the Charlotte Dickinson, the sister of Willie. So Charlotte Davidson came back into the picture, or Charlotte Dickinson came back into the picture as Charlotte Davidson when she moved into the Chippewa Club or into the Oliver Iron Mining Company house in 2001. Shortly after they arrived one morning, as they were sitting for breakfast, their children came running down the stairs and said they had seen Willie, that Willie had talked to them. Now you can imagine the kind of reception they would have got from that. I would not be surprised if they got their little bottoms paddled somewhat. But I believe that they continued to tell their parents this. Morning after morning, they would come down and tell them about seeing Willie and talking to Willie. And the parents became very upset with this. However, when you look at Mrs. Davidson, she was a very upright, respected woman. And she started to have things happening to her, like in the night hearing a baby crying, like hearing people walking on the third floor where there were no people, and people running down the stairs, and at one occasion explained to her husband that she'd even seen some kind of movement. So she was beginning to believe that there may be something to these stories. Being respected community leaders like they were, the family decided they weren't going to say anything to anybody. So when they moved out, there had been no conversation with their friends or in any way describing Willie until the day in 1947 when Charlotte Davidson happened to meet Charlie Madden and explained the story to him. Now where it goes from there, Louis Petto, longtime manager of the Chippewa Club, would on many occasions talk about things that were strange. His office was located down underneath the steps going up to the second floor, and on many occasions he would indicate that he had heard people running either up or down the stairs and there was nobody there. That the tablecloths were laid out on the floor when he went to check to see how things were. Again, the liquor bottles had been moved around. But the thing that really got him to the point of a believer was on at least 2 occasions, one that I'm going to tell you a little bit about. As he left the club one night, he happened to glance up, and in the second floor, the light was on in the second floor building, and there was somebody in the window waving at him. And he figured it was a club member that he had locked in the club. So he turned around and went back to the club, unlocked the door, went inside, and there were no lights. He tried turning the lights on, so he went down to the fuse box, and one of the fuses was out. And he decided, well, he's not going to fool around with this tonight. He hollered, there was nobody answered, nobody in the club. So the next morning he came, went down into the basement, plugged in the fuse, and it sparked all over the place. And the probability, if that fuse had been in the box, it would have caused a serious fire in the club. And from that point forward, Louis Petto felt pretty good about Willie, and that he was not only a friendly ghost, but a protective ghost. Lena Garagiola, who was the chef for over 25 years at the club, would not go into the building by herself, because the same kind of things happened to her. Lights on, stuff out of the drawers, things going bump in the night. But what put her over the top was one morning she was working in the kitchen, and the stairs from the back stairs from upstairs came into the kitchen, and she heard this person coming down the stairs singing, and she went over to see who it was, and there was nobody there. It was from that point on she refused to enter the club. Anthony Giovannini Sr., the caretaker for both the Davidsons, while they lived in the house, in the latter time they lived in the house, while the house was empty, and for a couple of years after the club was formed, was the caretaker. Now back in the 30s, there was a bowling alley that was part of the Chippewa Club. It was located back away from the building, but it was a 2-lane bowling alley, full-length bowling alley. And on, again, at least 2 occasions, when Mr. Giovannini was done with his chores in the main building, he came out and there were lights on in the bowling alley, and there was noise, bowling going on, and he's wondering who in the world is in the bowling alley. He unlocked the door, went in, the lights are on, the ball is down into the pit behind the bowling alley, the pins are all knocked down, and on one occasion he indicated that the pin was still spinning. He checked the windows, he checked the doors. They were locked. At that point, he became a believer. Mike Maraska, who some of you know, a lot of you know, longtime manager of the club, had similar experiences throughout the time he was here. The one that he points to is sitting in the office under the stairs and hearing the piano start up. And he went around the corner to where the piano was, nobody there. He became a believer. Lynn Forstrom, the current manager, is absolutely not a believer. She is a very strong-minded individual, and she will not give in to this. She will not admit to hearing any of this, and it will be good to talk to her after she retires from the club to see what her real opinion of the situation is. But the current staff, including some of the ladies that were working here at the Rotary meeting today, have encountered Willie. And some do not want to talk about it. And those that feel they've encountered Willie, at least one of them will not come into the building by themselves. So you can make up your own mind about Willie, but for over 40 or 50 years, more than that by now, things have happened in this club that cannot be totally explained. And at our meeting today, a door slammed shut and nobody was there, and the American flag fell over and was caught by one of the members in full view, and all of these things can be explained somehow, but I'm not entirely sure they can be explained totally. All in all, Willie is a friendly, protective ghost. And this story will go on and on. I would like to add a footnote to the tape that we just ran about Willie and the ghost. One, I neglected to mention my name at the beginning of the program. My name is Bill Verrett. The second, I would like to make a correction to a date. In the tape, I indicated that the Davidsons moved, the Davidsons moved into the Chippewa Club in 2001. And in fact, they moved into the club in 1901. I just wanted to make that factual correction. Thank you. Now, I really like this story, and I like to spread it around too. Thank you.